Welcome to the Lovely Dots podcast, where we believe that our words matter.
Giving you proof that you can change the world one word at a time.
And you get to be 100% real.
So let's have fun.
Welcome back to the Lovely Dots podcast, where I'm Nikki.
And I'm Amy.
And today we're talking about emotions and all the crazy ways that it affects us and ways that we can help control them when need be. So
let's dig in.
All right. So tell me when I say, okay, yeah, emotions are crazy. I am currently dealing with anxiety and all of these things that are so popular in the media right now around mental health. What's the first thing that pops in your head?
It makes me feel unsafe a little bit. Like thinking about emotions and I don't know. I guess what I do is I think of like the connotation that maybe we grew up with, or the connotation around emotions about, I feel like we all have emotions, but what do we do with them? What's your natural tendency to do with them, right? Is pretty typically, or at least for me, is to start stuffing things. When I start to feel emotions, it feels a little scary, like I'm out of control.
Yeah.
Do you feel that at all?
Yeah. And I think partly like starting this conversation, it's sort of like, oh, emotion talk, it's so woo-woo and like, just not it feels very like cool and chic to say it and talk about it right now, like we're being really deep. But in actuality, like, and I think you feel this way too, it's a conversation or multiple conversations that people are not having in reality. Like, yeah, we're having trouble with anxiety and depression, all of these things. And yeah, we hear about how social media is affecting us and that could be a huge player in it. And our lack of real connection with people because of the kind of culture that we have now. And we hear all of that, but I feel like so much is that so much of the problem is that we're not diving deep into, okay, yeah, this is happening. What are we going to do about it? Like, how are we going to be proactive as people as moms who want to raise kids, as, people who care about our neighbors, about our friends and our family? It's like, let's dive in and actually take part in solving this problem.
Yeah.
Instead of feeling like, oh, it's so big, we can't do anything. Like, that's just not true.
It's like, I would call it like emotional attunement almost, like becoming attuned with your emotions and actually experiencing them. Because I think that for me, at least, I grew up being what I would say an emotional person is. Like, I could cry at the drop of a hat, or I could feel really big feelings, but almost not being attuned with them enough to know how to handle them when I experience them. I think we're going to talk about a little bit about how we experience our emotions here in a few minutes, but I think that if we can't be emotionally attuned for ourselves, how are we going to teach our kids to be that way? And I think that's maybe a little bit of the discrepancy, is we grew up in this world where if you're feeling big feelings as a kid, a lot of times what people tell you to do is to like, oh, you're fine, you're okay, stop crying, or like, and so then that, for me at least, continued on into the rest of my life, and like not even knowing how to explain when I felt sad or when I was crying, like what I was feeling and how to like process that.
Yeah. Like your ability to name it and to really be like, okay, I'm sitting in this particular feeling, emotion, whatever it is, and not just gonna be like, okay, this sucks, but I gotta stuff it in. Nobody's gonna know. I have to cover it up with something, or I have to switch it real quick because mom and dad taught me, like, this is not what we do right now.
That's what I was gonna ask you, is like, do you feel like you grew up in a home where like there were certain situations where it was okay to feel your emotions, or do you feel like it was pretty typical of like these are the only people that can see these emotions, or we don't express these emotions or feelings.
Yeah, it was more the hidden. And I'm like, I say that and I almost internally cringe because like I know that my parents didn't intend for that to happen.
Right.
They were just saying, okay, here's the behavior that we need to have when you're in public. Or this is the correct way that we act as respectful kids to the mom and dad, not like yeah, they were just trying their best to like raise me in a way that was going to benefit me later in life. But in actuality, like I think I sit more on the side that you do, where it's like now I'm like, I feel like I have to almost be a people pleaser in some regards, because if I get these big emotions and say I'm at, you know, some event or whatever, like of course, you know, you need to like be professional, but you can't be real most, like you don't even almost know how to be real sometimes because your immediate reaction is nope, we're just changing that, deal with it later, whatever it's going to be.
I think there's a lot of truth in the fact that like we lose some genuineness, is that a word?
Yes, it is.
Okay. Well, you lose some of that when we try to tamper our emotions or push them down and like not deal with them until later. And I think that kind of goes back to like vulnerability. And, you know, of course, there's probably safer people than others to experience your emotions around or like talk about your emotions around. But I think I was kind of raised in a similar way that, like, I'll say my dad was very not unemotional, but he had a job. He was a firefighter. He had a job where he had to um, keep his emotions at bay in a sense because he had to be prepared to act, you know, in a situation. And my mom was a nurse, so she had some of that too, but she was kind of on the other end of the spectrum. And so it was like having two parents where it's like there's conflicting expectations with your emotions was really hard because I could see my mom cry or experience things, but then my dad would be like, suck it up, rub some dirt in it, and you're okay, you know?
Yes.
So that's confusing for a kid. And I don't think we think too much about how the fact that, like, while that wasn't necessarily bad, it does affect who we become as adults, I think.
Yeah. So now knowing that and like recognizing that in yourself, like how does that change how you parent?
Yeah.
How is that different for you?
Well, I have to start by saying that this is a journey that I've been on for a long time, but most recently through the loss of my dad and getting to a point where my emotions were like, it was like I kept thinking, I feel like I'm a bathtub about ready to overflow, you know? And anytime something even remotely small happens that maybe previously I could manage a little bit better, I would overflow. And I didn't like that feeling of being out of control. And I think that's part of it is like we want to have control. And so we like clamp on tight to like not allowing ourselves to feel those emotions. But like going to counseling and like talking to somebody about what was really going on in my body and my mind and related to those emotions and kind of talking through this kind of stuff allowed me to get to a place where I was more self-aware, I think, of my emotions. And I think as a mom, for me, it's really hard, I think, to look at your kids and see pieces of them that are from you and then feel okay about it, you know, and not try to like judge them harshly and stuff. That's something that I have really experienced, especially with my daughter Olivia, because we're very similar in the way that we respond to things. And she has big emotions. And previously, I would be like, you're fine, you're okay, you don't need to cry about it, you know. But as I've learned for myself, like how I want people to respond to me when I'm feeling big emotions, like what better way than right now when she's young to teach her, like, it's okay to feel sad. And mama's going to sit here and be sad with you. And it's hard sometimes because the things that she's sad about, I don't really connect to.
Yes.
You know, I'm sure you can relate. You have two boys.
Yes.
But I think it's important that we lean in with them and we help them see that it's okay to feel those emotions and how to then like respond when we do have big emotions or even little emotions about certain things. The other thing I was thinking too is like emotions and feelings. Are those two things connected, related? Are they separate things? What do you think?
I think they're very separate.
What do you mean?
So, goodness, I wish I could remember exactly where I had heard this.
Mm-hmm.
But there was somebody I was listening to talk about how essentially the science behind it.
Mm-hmm.
So, like, emotions are the end experience of something. So, like, it begins with a thought, right? And then the thought is transformed into a feeling,
Mm-hmm.
which you feel in your body.
Mm-hmm.
And then that becomes an emotion. So, like, and then the longer that you feel this or go along with this emotion or replay what has caused this in your head and really build that neural pathway in your head of like, okay, connecting the dots, X event equals feeling X, and just going in the circle, the more ingrained that becomes in you. And that's why so many people have problems getting past trauma or feeling bitter in life all throughout life, even though it's this one experience that's really transformed them, because they can't get past this one emotion, which is the end product of this experience. So I feel as though the feelings are separate than the emotions. It's kind of this path that trickles down to that. But for me, that was really enlightening to kind of learn and hear about, because like, okay, if you can really start paying attention to your thoughts, and understanding that, one, not every thought is true, and two, you don't have to accept that thought in your head, that that can start controlling, as a trickle down effect, how you're going to play out, how you feel and the emotions that you have, and thus how you're acting throughout life. Like, this is where it begins. So long answer, but yeah, I think emotions are different than feelings. Feelings are more tied to your body, and emotions are more tied to the end experience of this conglomerate of a thought.
Yeah, and going back to kind of what you said, I've been listening to Jenny Allen. She recently wrote a book called Untangle Your Emotions, and she talks about how, whether it's big trauma or little trauma from like growing up or any time in your life, an experience that you had can essentially control or come up later on when you have a similar experience or something that's related potentially, and then that emotion is connected to that experience that you had when you were younger. So like, for example, my daughter is very clumsy. I am also very clumsy. I think I gave her that trait, and my husband will laugh because it happens all the time. We're stubbing toes and falling down and getting hurt out of nowhere. But for the longest time, my daughter, when she would stub her toe or when she would get hurt, my empathy was zero. I was like, you're fine. Get up. You're okay. You know what I mean? Until I started realizing, why is that my response? Because I almost would get like this panicky feeling of like, you're okay. You're okay. You're fine. Like, you don't have to feel that way, you know?
Yeah.
And when I started thinking through, like, why am I feeling this? Because I started to think, like, that's probably what my parents said to me when I was little and clumsy and fell and hurt myself. Like, you're fine. And so now my response, because of that, is to go and sit with her and hold her in my lap and say, I'm so sorry you stubbed your toe. I know that hurts really bad. Because then I think about it. I'm like, that's what I wish somebody would do for me when I hurt myself, you know? So trying to, like, I think what we're calling it is name your emotion, or try to, first of all, name it. Like, I feel sad or I feel scared. And acknowledging the emotion rather than saying, I am an anxious person, saying, I feel anxious, not like almost like naming that over yourself, but naming what it is because it's separate from your identity and who you are.
Yes.
I think that's really important to remember. And then being able to wonder about it. Don't judge that emotion like, I shouldn't feel upset in this moment, or I shouldn't feel sad. Instead, wondering, why do I feel that way? And then like where do we go from there once we've wondering and start to assess? Like that leads us to thinking through more and more and then allowing ourselves to feel it.
Yeah. That's like emotional intelligence.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's hard to get there with every time you experience an emotion.
It is, because it's not just emotions, it's just like self-awareness in general.
Yeah.
Which honestly, I wish that we would teach our children to do as like preschoolers, you know, like not just about emotions, just in general, like self-awareness. I feel like it's been very this, I don't know, behind the scenes, like, you know, some parents are really good at it and others just are like aloof and don't really pay attention to it as a necessary trait, but it affects you so hardcore in everything that you do as an adult. Everything. It's almost like I just don't understand why it's not imperative that it's like almost more important than ABCs, you know?
Yeah.
I know.
So what do you envision like in regards to self-awareness? If you're talking to Rocco or Luca and you're trying to help them become more self-aware, what does that like look like for you, and how do we do that better for our kids?
That's a good question. And I think I'm really learning as I go, but and a lot of it starts with what you just described with Olivia about sitting with them and being with them in their experience, because if you don't start there, you can't understand them enough to help them understand them. But I really think that, you know, asking a lot of questions and having that really intentional conversation with your kids, instead of thinking they're just a kid, like getting on their level and, you know, really trying to understand is so huge.
Because I think they can manage and process a whole lot more than we give them credit for.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think that asking those questions, or like, I wonder why you feel sad right now, Olivia, because that's a lot of times our emotion or our response. I wonder why you feel sad, or what's making you feel sad. And sometimes they can't always express that, but if you give them that availability of your attention and your time to like sit down with them, and then yeah, it creates that space for self-awareness, I think. And for me as an adult, up until very recently, I did not have that ability to think about my thoughts almost. It was like I would have thoughts, and like you were saying, not everything that we think is true or helpful or right, really. And I never stopped to actually think and assess my thoughts and not judge them. I think that's where we go wrong a lot of times, because it's super easy to judge ourselves and judge the things that we think or overthink. We've talked a little bit about that. But I think if we can just really wonder and be curious instead of be so hard on ourselves, at least for me, that's where I've found that I have benefited and grown the most, is trying to give myself grace in that.
Yeah, that's huge. And I think with any emotion, just having the ability to stop and take time and feel okay with not knowing, like sit in the uncomfortable of being unsure until you figure it out. It's almost like the scientific method behind
emotions.
What is happening here, you know, like, and because honestly, really no one else is going to figure it out but you.
Yeah.
You can go to a therapist, which is wonderful, and a counselor and talk to people, but in all actuality, you're not going to be able to figure it out unless you're willing to like do the work, to sit there and be uncomfortable and think about it. Think about what you're thinking about.
Yeah. And that's the thing, is like you have to take the steps to do the work. And one of the things that in regards to emotions I've been thinking about is when we experience emotions, it's kind of like, oh, we say that word and it's just like a little cloud of nothingness. But in reality, we feel our emotions or we think them here, but our body pretty typically has a response when we are feeling big emotions. I mean, when you're happy about something, like you get excited, your heart rate increases, that kind of thing. Same when you're having anxiety or when you're scared. I mean, God literally created us with fight or flight for a reason. You're feeling those emotions and you're utilizing the power that your body also provides during those emotions. potentially, whether you're going to fight or run, in those circumstances. But I think in a lot of other emotions besides just that, we experience it in our body. Mm-hmm. And then if we're not acknowledging that, a lot of times instead of like just stuffing it down, we actually react with an emotion rather than responding in an emotion.
Yeah. And I think that's interesting what you're talking about, feeling it in your body regardless. Because I was listening to someone talk about actors, like the really good actors. And they were saying that they don't ever get anxious. They don't ever get nervous. And then so many people were like, yeah, whatever, like you just
impossible.
Yeah. Ridiculous. You just got one of those like, big statues. Of course you got nervous. But no, what they found out was that they're just renaming it. So they're making the intentional decision that I'm not nervous. I'm excited, which is also interesting because physiologically those two things, those two named emotions cause the exact same biological response. So it's just all in your perspective as well. But you can go on stage and perform and do all these things so much easier if you don't feel the pressure of like, I'm going to screw up. I'm nervous, No, you're just awesome and 100% amazing. And so I'm just really excited to go out there. I don't know why we talk like this.
Yes, the hair flip.
Yes.
Yeah, I think perspective has a lot to do with it too. And I do think that that goes back to like our thoughts and the harsh thoughts that we tend to have about ourselves and connection to that. Because I think it would be easy to just say, really nervous. And I'll share this. I told you this the other day when we kind of launched our social media page. I was at work and I started to feel severely anxious. And I was feeling it in my body. It wasn't like I was having the thoughts floating around in my head. It was right here in my chest. I was feeling anxious. And I was like, why am I feeling this way? And I stopped. I did what we're talking about. I stopped and I thought about, okay, I am feeling anxious. Okay. I'm feeling it in my body. Why am I feeling anxious? And then I thought, like, okay, me and Niki are launching this thing that we're really passionate about and we really have high hopes for it. And then thinking, that's scary for me. I'm doing something I've never done before and it's so scary. And what if I flop? And what if I fail? And having those thoughts of like, okay, yes, that's probably the right emotion that I'm having right now. But also like allowing myself to stop and think about it, like almost instantly tampered down the anxiety that I was feeling in my body. And I started to tell myself things like, you know what? You guys get to do something super awesome and really cool. And so what if it doesn't go as far as you want, if it helps somebody, one person, you know what I mean?
Yes.
So just like processing through it rather than I could have felt anxious all day to the point of making myself sick. But instead I like took the time to like work through it.
I'm like so proud of you for that, by the way.
Thanks.
Like that's a big deal.
Thanks. It was hard.
Yeah. Yeah, that is hard to switch gears.
Yeah.
But that's huge to be able to say like, okay, this happened and you know what, we're cool. Cause oh man. Yeah, I've had my share of those moments. Like I think I was telling you about my first business when I was trying to like email people. Holy moly, ridiculous. I'd sit there and read and reread these emails I was about to send these people like 50 times. Like, oh, is there any spelling error? Like ridiculous amount. Like I spent
trying for the perfection of it and then just making yourself anxious.
Yeah, just spinning and spinning wheels and then, sending an email and then be like, oh, did they email me back? I'm like obsessively checking my inbox and putting all this pressure on things that didn't need to be. But, it took a long time for me to really be able to be comfortable in the uncomfortable.
Yeah, I think that's what it is. That's exactly it because we are literally humans living in a world full of uncomfortable things and we're going to encounter them. And I think that that's that's what I'm struggling with a little bit as a parent. And then looking back as like, my parents did the best that they could with what they had, for sure. And they were great people. They were great parents. But like this balance of trying to help my children, like I don't want to shelter them so much that when they become adults and they get out into the real world, they don't know how to act or respond, because we live in an uncomfortable world, and they're going to encounter hard things. And you know this, our phrase at our household is Hallbergs do hard things. And it's one of those things that like I preach at my kids, but sometimes I need to like preach it myself, because it's hard to do hard things. But I want them to be able to get into the world and know how to respond and feel okay being in an uncomfortable situation in regards to like hard things in life.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. Which I really admire. Like I love that. I wish we could steal it and then, you know, it wouldn't be weird. And we'd just be like, oh yeah, the wolves do hard things. You'd be like, whatever, we said it first.
No, listen. Just wolf pack.
Wolf pack
does hard things.
There you go. There you go. Yeah, but it's like one of those key things that I think help you deal with your emotions is to know that it is going to be hard. It is going to be uncomfortable, and that is okay.
Yeah.
That is fine. And there's so much peace and freedom and the ability to just like be authentic and real when you're like, yeah, it might be awkward. What's the worst that can happen?
Oh.
It probably is going to be awkward. No big deal. Yeah.
Yeah. I think about too, in regards to emotions, like being willing to invite people in when you're experiencing those emotions. And that's something, again, for me that I've been taking little steps in recently. And I think that when we just let them fester inside of us, then honestly, I feel like that gives the devil a foothold in your life, because you're living in a place of almost bondage with thinking these things and feeling these things that literally can be all consuming if you're not speaking it out and sharing it with other people. And I think that goes back to why we believe that words matter so much, is that if you're holding it in and keeping it close and you're not speaking it out, what are you gauging it on? If you're not gauging it on God's word about, is this true, is this real, is this right, then
you need people to like help you hold to what is true, like, because it can get so far off in your head very quickly.
Yeah.
And I think you're spot on with that. Like, it's not even just accountability, you know, the element of being vulnerable and being real with trusted people and not trusted people.
Sure.
I mean, I think that's where God does so much work. I mean, it not only helps heal you, but it can really help other people heal. It can make them feel closer to you, and it can vice versa. And you know, that connection is priceless in so many ways. Like, we're wired to need that.
Yeah.
And I think that's one reason why we don't have that feeling of belonging in a way. You know, it's that lack of connection that we, you know, we're not sitting down and being like, hey, Debbie Sue, you know, I had this really awful day and this thing really hurt my feelings, or whatever it is, you know, and we're just saying, oh, like, whatever, you know.
Just pushing it to the side and not like allowing people to even know, like, okay, why are you feeling that way? And like, I had no idea you were feeling that way until you told me. Like, thanks for telling me. I think that, like you said, it strengthens our connections with people when we're willing to be vulnerable in our emotions. And it also invites them in a way that allows them to do the same thing.
Yeah. Which I think is key.
It is. And I think, you know, again, it feels unsafe sometimes to be in your emotions, but I think there's so much freedom in almost speaking out what you're feeling, because it gets rid of that bondage of like the thought of like, is this actually really true? Or is it okay that I'm feeling this way?
Yeah. And that's all we ever really want, is to feel like assured that, okay, we're in the right spot in the world. We're all right. Everything's cool. Yeah.
So some takeaways, I think, from what we talked about today, because we talked about a lot. And we digressed maybe a little bit. I don't think that's a problem, but some big takeaways I think that we want people to think about in regards to your emotions is when you start to feel an emotion, which is interesting because we refer to emotions like we feel it, because we do.
Yeah.
So acknowledging what's going on in your heart, in your brain, what's going on in your body when you start to feel an emotion, and go ahead and name that emotion. And don't let it be who you are, because that's not who you are. You're feeling an emotion. Acknowledge it and then be curious about it. Where does this emotion come from, or why do I think I'm feeling this right now in this situation, in this moment? And then allowing yourself to experience that emotion. It doesn't have to be a long drawn out thing, but I think rather than stuffing it or numbing, because I think a lot of us tend to just numb against emotions. We can talk on that all day probably, but instead of allowing yourself to do that, allow yourself to feel that emotion and live in it. And the last thing that I want to encourage people to do, and I think we both believe this to be true, but invite somebody in when you're experiencing those emotions and see what that does for your connection with that person or your relationships, and see how that allows them to also be vulnerable in their emotions. So take those, try them out. Let us know if it helps you, because I know for me it's helped.
Yeah, we'd love to hear your stories. Feel free to comment. But for now, thanks for listening and watching. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and follow. And for now, see you on the flip side.